Hello everyone. Today I wanted to do a quick video on a game that I had just finished recently. It's a game that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, and I don't see a lot of reviews for it on YouTube. That is Mimana Iyar Chronicle for the PSP. There's probably a reason, in all honesty, why there aren't a lot of people that review the game. The game is fairly flawed. There are a lot of good things about it, though, so I wanted to just put in my 2 cents on it since I just finished it a little bit ago. And again, it was one that not a lot of people discuss. So, Mimana Iyar Chronicle was originally on the PSP. I played it on the Vita on the PlayStation Network. And it is a Japanese role-playing game that's inspired in a lot of ways by the Tales of series. I haven't played a whole lot of the Tales of games, but it was enough, so I mean, it may not adhere to that mold as closely as I think it does, but since I'm not really a big Tales player, it certainly seemed like it was in that same vein. So if you're really into that series, though, you may know more of the differences than I do between the two, and you may disagree with me that it's in that style. But I think if it's not in that style, it definitely was at least trying to be. And especially when it comes to the combat, and that's the main area where it feels like a Tales game. So in this game, you play as a mercenary who is being hired by this little girl to go and collect these gems. And the thing that's kind of odd about the story is you don't really get a lot of information on why she hired you or what these gems are about. In fact, you ask her, and her answer just always, well, I can't tell you, I can't tell you. So it made it really difficult for me to get invested in the story very much. I was interested in the characters. The characters were actually pretty well written and actually very well voice acted. I really liked the voice acting in this game. But the storyline itself wasn't very compelling because every time you kept trying to inquire to get more information on it, she just kept pushing you away. And in typical JRPG fashion, you gather more adventurers with you on your quest. And you do start getting some of the answers. And the part that's probably the most interesting about the story is your character and his past and his role in the world kind of gets revealed, and that's more interesting than what this girl is doing with these gems that she's trying to gather. Part of the problem with why the story, I feel, is a little disjointed or a little underwhelming is the fact that Mimana Iyar Chronicle is considered to be like the first part of a multi-volume set. And I don't know if those games ever came out in Japan. I know they certainly didn't come out in English. So when you get to the end of this game, you have some closure, but it also sets up the next part of the game, or the sequel. And it really doesn't give you any final closure. There's a lot of questions left unanswered, things like that, because there are supposed to be more games. Mimana Iyar Chronicle was pretty universally panned. It's got a very low Metacritic rating. And so I don't think it did well enough to warrant any English versions of those games. And again, I don't even know if they came out in Japan or not, because I don't know, maybe it was more well received in Japan. But that is a little frustrating because you get to the end of that story and you just will never find out the rest of it. Luckily, the story's not really all that interesting, so it's not something that's going to keep you up at night. So in this game, you're traveling around. And this game is a perfect example of a game that has a lot going for it. Because even though I sound a little negative on it, I actually did have fun with it. I wouldn't have finished the game if I hadn't had some fun with it. And there are a lot of parts of it I really liked. Like I mentioned, the characters are interesting and it's very well voice acted. So they did a good job in localizing it. The script is kind of funny. It's got some funny moments. It's got a lot of good things. The combat itself is pretty fun. It's got the same type of combat, similarly, that Tales does. You go into a battle, it's a separate screen, you're moving your character around in real time, you're pushing a button, it's more, push the button to actually swing the sword, it's not turn-based. And that's actually a lot of fun at the beginning. And so the game actually has a pretty good first impression. The problem is, it really comes down to one big issue, and that is dungeon design. And the dungeon design in this game has kind of marred the whole experience, which is, I actually would like to do a video just on dungeon design because that's such a vital part of a game, of a role-playing game. And there are a lot of games that I've played that have either I haven't finished or I struggled to get through because of how the dungeons were designed. So where it is in this game, and when I say dungeon, I mean pretty much anywhere in the there are definite dungeons, and those have some poor design. But I'm also kind of including some of the areas as you're getting to the dungeons, areas where you will encounter monsters. Because there is an overworld map, but that's just a bunch of, like, that's a glorified menu, and you select where you want to go. When you actually get into those areas, though, where you're going toward the dungeons or toward the location, then you will be able to fight monsters and things like that. Those areas are problematic as well. The areas in getting to the dungeons aren't really all that bad, except for the fact that they're reused way too much. Like I mentioned, there is an overworld map, but it's not something where you can have all of these different places and you can select them. You have to get to it. So you basically go to the forest that's right next to the town. There's one town in this game. You go to the forest, and that forest has different paths that will take you to the different locations in the game. And that is kind of frustrating because you're always going to that same exact forest, fighting the same exact monsters to get through it, to get to where you need to go. Once you get there, though, what the problems that I have are with the dungeons is that they're all set out kind of maze-like, and it's very much a labyrinth sort of experience. So you are going through trying to figure out how to get through this area, try to get to the next objective, but they're all very similar. The design is not varied enough to make it interesting. And it's also so similar, all the different rooms and different passages within these maze-like dungeons all look the same, so it's so easy to get lost. And there is no in-game map or anything like that. So really the only way that you're probably going to navigate through these is just, I mean, if you have the kind of brain capacity to keep all this stuff in your head, that's great. I would probably have to write it down or draw a map. Or you could do like I did and go check out a walkthrough once I got annoyed with them. There were only a couple of times that I did that because there were a couple of dungeons that I just kept pressing on through and got to the end. But especially the last couple of ones, especially one in particular that is really, really difficult as far as just confusing and awkward. I just got bored. I just got frustrated. I was like, okay, I'm close enough to the end of the game that I want to finish it, but I'm done with this dungeon. I'm sick. I'm out. And so I'm like, let me look up a walkthrough, let me follow exactly where to go. And that wasn't done because I didn't think the game was, or I wasn't up to the challenge. I was just bored. By that point, I was just bored and frustrated with that dungeon and didn't want to be bothered with it anymore. Life's too short. So I did that and then got through that way. And again, it was really, there are, I think, 6 or 7 major dungeons in the game where you're going through to get these gems. And that was really only, I think it was 2. There's really 2 that I had to look up. Although other ones did frustrate me, they just didn't frustrate me to the point where I had to look up the walkthroughs. So that's the biggest problem with that game. It kills the experience. I think the combat's fun. The combat isn't as complex as it is in Tales. I mean, you can give commands to your other party members. You do have magical spells and things like that, but really, most of the time, one thing that was frustrating with the combat is the magical abilities that you have generally aren't as strong as if you just button mash on the attack and just attack that way. I was giving commands to my party members sometimes for healing or different magical spells, but as far as my main character, I was just pounding on the X button to auto attack or to do the regular attack, because that one was as powerful or more powerful than some of these spells. The other thing is, too, there are some weird issues with actually getting the spells to hit. I don't want to go into that too deeply. If you ever play the game, you'll see what I mean. You shoot the spells, and sometimes it's hard to aim at the monsters because there's a casting time. So while you're casting the spell, I guess I will get into it actually. While you're casting the spell, you stand still, the monsters are still moving, and then you fire your spell. Well, where you were when you started casting the spell, the monster would have been hit, but by that time, since you have the casting time, he's moved. So little things like that just made some of the spells frustrating, and then I just ended up not using them. But having said that, the combat for the button mashy qualities it has is really good, and it is a lot of fun. It does get a little old after a while, but the monster design is really cool. They've got some neat looking monsters. A lot of them are repeated or just given color swaps, but they're still really cool looking. The graphics in the game are good. I like especially in the combat, the animations and the sprites that you of your main character, your party members, they look really good. They're nice and big, and they're a lot of fun. So there's a lot of things about this game that are good, and there are a lot of things that could have been improved on, and perhaps were, if they were able to make the rest of the games in the series. Again, I couldn't find any information on if they actually did in Japan or not. All I know is that they did not release them in America. So, or I think in any other English-speaking area. So, so as far as whether or not I would recommend Mimana Iyar Chronicle to you, it depends. It actually kind of hit me right where I needed to be because I was getting ready for Persona Q. I knew that game was going to take up a lot of my time, but I was just still in the mood for an RPG, so I wanted one that was short. This game's only about 15 to 18 hours, so it was perfect for me. I wanted an RPG, but I didn't want some long 60-hour epic because I knew that Persona Q was coming out, and I didn't want to be involved in anything when that hit. So it worked perfectly for me, and I did have a good time, but I would say probably 80% of the time I spent with the game was having a lot of fun. But that 20% is rough, and it really does, again, it's a perfect example of a game that has so many things going for it that are good, even though I tend to be talking right now about all the negative things, but there were a lot of good things about it. But it was just a handful of things that mar the whole experience. So it's a $10 game on the PlayStation Network. If that sounds interesting to you, you could have a lot of fun with it, because I did, but you may just want to be prepared to look up a walkthrough or sometimes on some of these ridiculous dungeons, because they're just not fun, and it's just not good design. So that's really what the game kind of comes down to. So, well, thank you, as always, so much for watching.